Yakshamlar, to my Turkish friends, magandang hapon po to Filipinos, good afternoon to all. Distinguished representatives from the diplomatic community in Ankara, officials from the Turkish government, colleagues from the academe, to those virtually joining us on Facebook Live, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Henry Bensurto, the Philippine ambassador to Ankara, to Turkey, and non-resident ambassador to Azerbaijan and Georgia. Again, Yakshamlar to all of you. First of all, I'd like to greet all of us for the 9th anniversary. Later, I will explain why to all of us and not just the Philippines. Of course, to Filipinos, it's a happy West Philippine Sea Day. But later I will explain why it's not just about the Philippines. On behalf of the Philippine Embassy in Ankara, I would like to thank all of you, of course, for joining us to mark this important occasion. We celebrate this day just as we celebrate the day our forebears declared Philippine independence on June 12, exactly 30 days ago. We celebrated the birth of a nation with the name Philippines. 30 days after, we continue with that saga, with that continuing struggle, no longer to acquire that name, but to make sure that that name will have the dignity within the community of nations as equals with other sovereign states. And that is today when the International Tribunal, when the International Arbitration Tribunal issued its ruling on the South China Sea arbitration. To summarize, that decision restored the dignity of a small country and restored its place in the family of nations. It restored the dignity of every Filipinos, past, present, and future generations of Filipinos. But that celebration, as we celebrate among ourselves as Filipinos, it's not just about us. It's really about the community of nations. The implications does not stop with Filipinos from the archipelago. It continues beyond other regions in a more global way because it is about rule of law. Nowadays, when we are faced with so many conflicts, Turkey, north of you is a conflict in Ukraine, south of you, the Middle East. Recently, we had this terrible conflict between Iran and Israel. At the very heart of those conflicts is the question of rule of law. At the heart of those conflicts, under a siege, what is at risk and what is in danger is actually the concept of rule of law. The very fabric, the very fabric of the international political system that somehow provided peace since World War II. And it is precisely on the rule of law that the entire international political structure is really anchored. And at the very core of that is the concept of rule of law being the tie that binds all of us as a community of nations. And it is in that context, therefore, that people will have to look into the South China Sea arbitration as a defense, as a promotion of peaceful settlement of disputes. In the time when the concept is under attack and the temptation to use force, it's very tempting to go back to politics, power play. But when the danger is there and when the temptation is so high for us to revert to the use of force, I think that's the time when we have to work very hard for the rule of law. And the South China Sea arbitration is at the very core of that rule of law. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, with your indulgence, let me give you an overview of what the South China Sea arbitration is all about. I think I've made some presentations today, because normally it will take about one semester or even two to discuss the entire subject. But today let me focus on the thought process, that led to arbitration. Essentially, what was in the mind of people who were involved in the South China Sea arbitration? The President, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, the people who were thinkers, the people who were working hard to ensure that we have the ability to face up to a very strong, powerful country, not by way of war, but by way of a peaceful road, the South China Sea arbitration. Therefore, if I may direct your attention to the screen, let me show you the first slide. It's hard to understand this slide because of so many lines. It's like a bowl of spaghetti with crisscrossing noodles, essentially. And it is precisely the confusion, the ambiguity, the chaos that you see in the screen reflects exactly what South China Sea was before arbitration. I use the verb was because after arbitration, obviously this will change. But let me explain what this complex South China Sea is all about in terms of those lines, because whenever you see those lines, they reflect the dispute and the conflict. For as long as those lines crisscross with each other without clarity, they constitute the conflict and the dispute. Let me explain those lines by going to the next slide. If you take out those lines, this is how South China Sea looks like. This is how our Creator created the geography of this region, how those islands look like. This is an accurate satellite picture, actually, of the South China Sea. The blue represents the sea, the green represents the land features. So basically, as you can see, in the middle is called the South China Sea, which is a semi-enclosed sea. Semi-enclosed because it does not have, it has narrow access to the main bodies of water called the Pacific Ocean, which you see on the right. And then below, actually, you don't see it here, the Sulawesi, the one in Indonesia. And there also is the passage, the Malacca Strait leading to the Indian Ocean. As you can see, that's why the term Indo-Pacific, because these seas are not isolated by themselves. They constitute a continuum, a continuing sea lanes of communication, which reflects how integrated the world is. So the first thing that you see there, the first line you see, is when we had the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which by the way is a good thing, at least for many of us. I know there are some disagreements on the provisions, and that could be a subject for further discussion. But on the whole, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea prescribed the entitlements that every country should have. Actually, to be more precise, for every land, what is the corresponding maritime entitlement, regardless of who owns, right? But eventually, those lines becomes the political geography. But be that as it may, here you will see those solid lines constituting the exclusive economic zone of the various littoral countries, including the archipelago, which you see in the middle. That is the Philippine archipelago. In the middle, you have Vietnam. On the other side, left side of yours, China. The island you see Hainan, and below the archipelago, Philippine archipelago, is Brunei and Malaysia and Indonesia. So as you can see, applying UNCLOS, you will see already overlap because every country is entitled to 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zone. Let me just explain this a little bit. For every land feature, for as long as the land feature, later there will be a clarification in this, a rock or an island, it is entitled to a maritime entitlement, depending on the character of the land feature. This is in accordance with the principle of the land dominates the sea. If you own an island or a rock, therefore it has a corresponding maritime entitlement. And UNCLOS principally prescribes, regulates those maritime entitlements and the relationship among countries on the matter of maritime entitlements. But as you can see already, there is an overlap in the north of the archipelago with China and Taiwan there, and also Japan there, and also with Indonesia. So, but this is not problematic. In fact, we have solved some of these because UNCLOS also prescribe the process by which maritime delimitation, when you have overlap, you have an overlap because the distance sometimes between countries is less than 200 nautical miles. Obviously, if the distance between countries is less than 200, there will be an overlap. But that's not problematic because that is subject to maritime delimitation. So this is the first problem, if I may put it. Then